In this polarized reality, we find ourselves seeking unity consciousness in a dualistic world. We have to find a way to unify even in the duplicity or the duality that we are faced with every day. With compassion, with love, with understanding, we can shower that abundance of light that we truly are onto these frequencies that we would consider unintegrated and dispersed and therefore dangerous or evil as we name it. Welcome back to another episode of the Art of Awakening podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sue Morter, and I'm always thrilled to be here with you in the beautiful topics that we get to cover, all centering around our ultimate awakening to our full potential and beyond what we perceive ourselves to be as the human beings that we've defined thus far. So we're here to discover new versions of that. And today we are honored to welcome an extraordinary guest whose insights illuminate the profound connection between science and ancient wisdom. His name is Gregg Braden, and I know most of you probably know who he is. And for the one person out there that might not yet have come into the 21st century, let me just describe who this man is. He's a New York Times bestselling author and a trailblazer. He's recognized worldwide for his revolutionary insights. Gregg has spent decades traveling, researching, synthesizing ancient wisdom and modern science to empower humanity. His newest book, Pure Human, The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power and Destiny, which I can't wait to talk about, inspires a radical shift in how we view ourselves in the face of technological evolution. So Gregg invites us to see the innate power in our humanness and to embrace the extraordinary potential that lies within each one of us. This book explores self-discovery, emotional resilience, and conscious choice are fundamental for navigating the workshop of life, a sacred process that fosters growth and healing and transformation. We are certainly here for that. Gregg's transformative teachings reveal how understanding and embodying ancient principles of wisdom can guide our personal and collective evolution. Please join me in welcoming Gregg Braden. Yay!
Dr. Sue Morter,
Yay!
it's such an honor to be with you. I've been looking. Today's a media day, and they give me a list on a spreadsheet of all my interviews, and I saw yours, and you're like going to make my day. I've been waiting all day for this moment. It's unscripted. We have no idea where it's going to go, and that's what makes it so fun. So thank you for my warm welcome and for inviting me. You know, Sue, thank you for trusting me with your community. That means probably more to me than you know right now. So thank you for that.
Well, yes, it's an easy do. Getting to know you over the recent years, it's been really wonderful to share the ideas that we share and exchange and to share the stage with you and work with groups of people. It's what we both love to do. And so doing it with someone who aligns so much with so many of the things that I teach and speak about is just pure joy.
Well, that's a two-way street. Two-way street.
Uh,
An honor and a thrill.
Awesome. Yes. And so I love your message in Pure Human. Can you share just a little bit about the inspiration about the book and the key themes that are coming forward for you right now? And then we'll dig into some other things too. But I just
Yeah,
got to get
thank
this
you.
book out in the world.
Well, this book, I did something a little different on this book when I wrote it. So typically, I write my books on airplanes, in airports, in hotel rooms, and then come to the office and pull it all together. I felt that the message in this one was so vital for our time. I took 7 months of the year 2024 with a few existing commitments. I pretty much cleared my schedule so that I could write and say exactly the way I wanted to say what the message of this book is. There are two parallel themes in this book, Sue. One is that there is a concerted effort in our world, in our lives right now, to replace our biology with technology. I know that's no secret to anyone watching this, but what we're seeing in the public is just the tip of the iceberg with regard to what's happening behind the scenes. When I say replace our biology with technology, I'm talking about computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, RFID chips under the skin, nanosensors in our circulatory and our respiratory systems, all of which compromise our humanness And what the best minds of our time now are actually telling us, scientists and philosophers alike, is that if we do not change the current trajectory of where we are right now, the laws that are already being enacted, the policies that are already being put in place, if we don't change that, there's a very good chance that we are the last generation of what will be called pure humans that this world will ever know. Within about 4 to 5 years, we will be some degree of hybrid, some people more, some people less, some kind of technology embedded into our bodies that allows us to interact with the world. Now, I want people to know that that's happening. I want them to know what the price is that we pay giving away our humanness and ultimately our divinity that we'll talk about. The second message to this two message theme book or two theme message book is that the best science of the modern world, Sue, it's telling us that in many cases, our own natural biology not only meets, but it exceeds the capacity of the very technologies that we're being asked to replace ourselves with. And I know that's a big statement, and I'm looking forward to unpacking that a little bit, but it requires us to see our bodies from a very different perspective than what we have conventionally been led to see and how we've been led to think of ourselves. I was in school back in 1950s, 60s, early 70s. We were taught to think of our bodies as like soft, gooey, sticky, mushy biological stuff, and it was written about in biology books and medical books. A few years ago, scientists began looking at us from the perspective of IT, information technology. And what they found is absolutely a mind blower, is that our bodies are the equivalent of every piece of technology we've ever built outside of our bodies, literally mimic what we already do in our biology, except here's the key, we do it better. And we do it on levels that we're only beginning to understand. So ultimately, this is a book of love because the question I'm asking in the book, Sue, is do we love ourselves enough to embrace the deep truth of our own human divinity, our own biology? And it's one of those questions that we can't answer with words. It's through our actions and the choices that we make in our lives. So my goal was ultimately for the reader to walk away, at the very least, with a deeper appreciation for what it means to be human. And I even wanted to push it a little bit, even beyond appreciation, a deep sense of pride for our humanness, where we come from, what our potential is, and what it would mean to our lives and to our world if we were to embrace that potential. That would be our ultimate destiny to do so. So that is a long answer to your short question. We can tie into this through the rest of our conversation, but those are the two parallel overlapping themes that underlie the new book.
It's so fascinating that we have turned to the ideas of replacing our own humanness with
Yeah.
technology because we're not animating our humanness to the full potential that it possesses, what it's made of. And because we don't utilize our whole, full, true selves, we then think that the answer is outside of us. And then we get really smart and intelligent and start inventing all sorts of ways to replace the things that aren't happening properly within and expect this to really run the show from the outside in of sorts. And all the while, we're just compounding the initial problem, which was that we stopped using our full capacity. We disconnected from the true source that we are, and therefore felt the need to invent something to do it for us. And so, what is it that you offer up in the conversation about, what to do about this, other than embracing our humanity and not allowing technology to take over? We get that instruction, and then what? How do we go about embracing that humanity in a way that can really supersede what this technology would be, quote unquote, doing for us?
Well, Sue, I love it when you talk that way because that statement is precisely why you and I are such a good team on the stage together. From very different backgrounds, we've arrived at the same place, the same conclusion. We teach, our styles are very different, but they're very complementary. Because I think when something's true, it's going to show up in a lot of ways, and everyone learns differently, and that's the value of having so many different perspectives. We are the product, and I'm talking about all of us, for every generation, at least since the end of World War II, at least. We're the product of an indoctrination. It's a process of indoctrination in mainstream education that says that humans, by their very nature, are a flawed form of life. FLAWED, flawed form of life. And among our flaws are things like human emotion that can sometimes cloud our logic and our thinking and our decision making. And our ability, empathy, is seen by the technologists as a flaw. I don't know about you, but I think I can speak for you and most of our viewers. These are some of the qualities and the attributes that we cherish the most in our species. But our young people have been taught that they are a flawed form of life. And nobody's teaching them, nobody's telling them how rare and beautiful and precious and sacred and powerful their own bodies are. They're given no reason to make the choices in their lives that would support that sacredness and that power. So if if they're told that they are a flawed form of life, it means they need something outside of themselves, as you just mentioned, and that something is being touted as technology. And technology has been elevated in the younger generations almost to the level of a godlike power. Computer chips and AI is where they're putting their power, their energy, their belief, and their faith. Can I, with your permission, I'd like to share just a really quick story from a yeah, it's a Native American man. Back in the early '90s, I was doing a reconnaissance trip into the Four Corners area of this big, beautiful country that we live in, Chaco Canyon. And I went up a week before so I would know the conditions when I would lead the group the following week. And I met a native man walking the opposite direction on the trail, and he stopped and talked to me for a few moments. And he told me a story, and I'll share it very briefly. He said, a long time ago, he said, the people in this land lived differently than they do today. They were close to the earth. They knew who they were, and they knew of their relationship with, he said, with the sky and the earth. He said, but then something happened. And even the ancestors don't know exactly what it was, but they began to forget who they were. Yet they had this deep longing for the power and the connection that they knew was possible in their hearts. So they began to build in the world around them gadgets, machines, and devices that reflected the power that they used to have within them to remind themselves of who they were. And then he paused. He says, we live in that world. He said, we're building in the world around us. The devices, the machines, the gadgets, they're complex and they're beautiful. He said, but they mimic what we already do in our bodies, except we do it better. And he said, we'll continue to clutter our exterior world with all of these devices until one day we wake up and remember who we are, that we can let that clutter go and we become more conscious, we become more sophisticated, but it's a simpler life. And now the science is bearing us out. So we know that every cell, the estimates are about 50 trillion cells, give or take, in the human body. Every cell, rather than seeing it from sticky, gooey, mushy, wet biology, if we look at it from an IT perspective, information technology, it's a mind blower. Because every cell literally is a miniature circuit. It has an input, it has an output. Components in the cell function as transistors and resistors and capacitors. Every cell emits photons of light and receives photons of light, and light is information. So we're communicating with one another in the world all the time. We store and retrieve information in every cell, just like we do on a computer chip. Our DNA functions as blockchain technology. There's a record of every successful genetic transaction for our species in every cell of your body and my body and everyone watching this. And listen to the three terms. It is immutable, it is secure, and it is transparent. And if those three words sound familiar, those are the descriptives that are now used for blockchain technology that is revolutionizing our decentralized financial world. It mimics the way information is stored inside of our DNA. And it goes on and on and on. But the bottom line is that we appear to be this highly advanced, technologically sophisticated, soft technology. And the beauty of our technology is we don't even have to know how it works to benefit from it because our user interface is so simple. The more complex, I learned this working in the tech world, the more complex a system is, the behind the scenes, the simpler the user interface. So I mean, we see that here. I just got a new smartphone, and it's a perfect example because we touch a picture, an icon with our finger, and we set into motion this whole series of events. We don't know what it is, but we're talking to our friends, we're paying our bills, and all we did was touch a picture. So the human body, we work the same way. Our user interface is the core of our most ancient and cherished and indigenous spiritual traditions. Thought, feeling, emotion, breath, focus, nutrition, and movement. That is the user interface for this extraordinary technology. And now what scientists will say is, oh, those are epigenetic triggers. And they are. The science of epigenetics tells us how every one of those, when we alter our thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, any of those things, nutrition, movement, breath, focus, we're actually up regulating or down regulating genes in the body. We're changing metabolic functions, but we don't know that. All we know is we had a different thought or we began to believe something differently. And that is what we stand to lose when we give our biology, our natural biology away to technology, because we are a form of life. It's based on something called use it or lose it. This is the fundamental principle in biology. When we replace our natural functions with technology, those natural abilities begin to atrophy. And pretty soon that they stop working altogether. Then they're passed epigenetically to the next generation. And the body says, oh, wow, we used to do those things, but we don't do it anymore because we've got a chemical in our blood doing it for us, or we've got a gadget under our skin doing it for us. This is how we lose a species. This is why we stand to become the last generation of pure humans.
Hmm. It's fascinating. Speak a little bit about the role of DNA in all of that. I know
Yeah.
there is a specific focus in DNA and historically, and that we're evolving our definition of its role and how it contributes to the picture, the outpicturing in our lives. And I'd just love to bring that into the circle specifically.
I'm excited to talk about this because the science is evolving, Sue, and there are new discoveries. As a scientist, I'm a degreed scientist. I'm a systems thinker, and I subscribe this to the tech journals so I can stay current. And in the scientific community, there's a journal called that is called Science that comes out once a month, telling about all the new discoveries in that month. But the discoveries are coming so quickly, they supplement that every week with a weekly newsletter that is then summarized at the end of the month. That's how fast these things are happening. One of the new discoveries is that, well, first of all, because scientists are looking at our bodies from an IT perspective, they're no longer publishing this in a biology textbook. So most people aren't seeing the discoveries that we're talking. You're not going to see them in mainstream classrooms or textbooks, even medical schools, because they're in these obscure IT journals like IEEE, for the engineering community. So the Journal of Advanced Soft Computing recently released a study showing that DNA literally, and this is their language, is a fractal antenna in the cell. Now, an antenna, we all know, tunes to a signal. A fractal antenna tunes to a broad range of signals across a broad spectrum of information. It means we've got information incoming all the time into those 50 trillion cells, and we're sending that information out as well. So the idea of DNA is changing as well. That As a physical scientist, what I learned when we look at the universe, only about 4% of the universe can be accounted for in physical matter. They say about 96% is something called dark matter, that it's an energy, but it's poorly understood. It definitely has an effect on everything. Well, this is interesting because the same principle applies to our DNA. We only know about maybe 5, 10% of the DNA in the human body. There's 90% that's not accounted for. It's called dark DNA. And scientists used to believe it was irrelevant. They used to discount it. They used to think it was something from our ancestors that we no longer use. Now they're saying it's vital. The dark DNA is where the instructions are originating that tell the physical DNA what to do. This has just come out recently in the tech journals. So the point is that we're on the precipice, Sue, of giving away our very humanness before we even know fully what it means to be human. Because, in my opinion, because of the arrogance of the scientific community that believe they have it all figured out. They know just
Mhm.
enough to tweak the DNA. They don't know about all of the consequences and the impact of everything they're doing with those tweaks. And we can cite some case histories in recent years about precisely that. Let me, if I could, let me just give an example. Some of these are kind of abstract ideas. I understand that. Let me give an example, a really concrete example of why it's important that we use our biology. When I was a kid back in 50s, 60s, early 70s, we were taught that when we come into this world, we have a fixed number of brain cells and you'll never have any more. And every beer that you drink in college will destroy, or at a concert, will destroy some of those brain cells. That was the leverage to get us to stop. Well, now we know that's not
Right.
true. And what I'm going to say is not an excuse to consume alcohol. I'm not saying that at all. That's a personal choice. But what scientists now know is there's a part of the brain, it's called the hippocampus, that is constantly producing the new brain cells until the last breath we take in this world, we are producing new brain cells, but there's a catch. And this is where it gets really interesting. If those new brain cells are not engaged in a meaningful way within about a week, within about 5 to 7 days of when they are produced, they will atrophy and they will die because the body feels that they're not needed. They're not being used, so they must not be needed. That principle applies to the entire human body. It applies to our immune system. If we've got chemicals that are mimicking our immune system and the body says, oh, maybe you don't need me anymore because the chemicals are doing it for me. It applies to the reproductive system, every system in the human body. When we replace functions in our bodies with computer chips, with RFID chips or chemicals in the blood, or now nanosensors that are already being used in medical technology. They're already here that move through the respiratory system and the circulatory system in the body. When we replace our biology with those, they are effectively overriding. They're doing things that the body now believes it's no longer needed. And in most cases, our bodies do a better job to begin with. And we can talk about that a little
Mhm.
bit as well. But the DNA is what drives so much, not all of it, but that drives so much of it. Now we know that there's a portion of our DNA that we've used to call junk DNA. Literally, it was called junk DNA because it was so poorly understood. And now it appears to be the vital origin of the instructions for the human body.
Isn't this always the case? Even, with quantum science, it was the empty space in between that in between the particles that then they began, with the invention of, the electron microscope, they began to find that there was actually stuff in that space in between, and it really wasn't empty at all, that the invisible world was actually having an influence on and creating, being generative toward the visible world. So I love what you're saying about the idea that we should never think that it is finished. That we employ this arrogance to determine that we know all there is to know, because the very next second there's something more to know, even if you did know it all. So
Yeah.
it's quite a beautiful parallel to something I speak about often, that remaining open and investigating and available to what we don't know is much more valuable than only, celebrating what has already been discovered.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Beautiful.
so, I think the embracing of all this comes down, it all begins with the way we think about ourselves. That's why I wrote this book. That's why I think it's so important. How can we embrace these extraordinary potentials if we don't even acknowledge that they exist? If we think of ourselves as a flawed form of life that needs something artificial to be the best version of ourselves, how can our bodies even heal if we don't believe, if we don't accept that we have the ability to do that? And those abilities all fall under the umbrella of a word. I'll use the word and I'll define it. The word is human divinity. These are all expressions of human divinity. I know for many people that word is linked in some ways to religion, and I can see how there are schools of divinity that make that connection. And they're good schools, they do good things. But the contemporary definition of divinity is a mind blower for many people because it says that
Hmm.
divinity, and I'm just doing this from memory now, divinity is the ability to transcend perceived limitations, and that's it. So, so to break that down, transcend becomes more than perceived limitations. This is what you and I have dedicated our lives to speaking about. Many of us are living limitations that are not even ours and they're not even true, that are not even real. They are limitations that we've been coerced, indoctrinated, mandated in some cases to accept. And divinity is our ability to move beyond all of those. So when we talk about
Hmm.
divinity, expressions of divinity, many people want to put divinity on the periphery. They say, okay, here's my divinity, and then here's my everyday life. What I'm
Hmm.
going to share suggests that divinity is the foundation of our everyday lives, that divinity is front and center, not peripheral. Divinity, expressions of divinity, our imagination is an expression of our divinity, creativity, our ability to innovate new concepts and new ideas, empathy, sympathy, compassion are expressions of human divinity, love, forgiveness, healing. These are all expressions of human divinity. There's a concerted effort to replace our bodies with technology because when we do, we veil access to our divinity. The technology denies us the freedom of the expression of our divinity. And when we no longer have that divinity, that is when we are more fearful. We're more vulnerable and susceptible to the ideas of others, the agendas. And we know there are many agendas. There's no shortage of agendas in the new year for what our lives and our world should look like. Divinity frees us from fear. When we no longer fear, we are less vulnerable to the ideas and the agendas of others, and especially when they're not good for us. Many of those agendas are not good for us as biological beings, as loving, forgiving, caring, healing biological beings. So when we embrace our divinity, it's not only good for us, Sue, it's good for our species, it's good for our world. We are celebrating our humanness by embracing our ability to imagine without fear. Many people are afraid to imagine these days or to communicate with another person what it is that they are imagining and creating, or to love. We all love to some degree, but loving without fear is a depth of love. It requires a surrender, not giving away our power, but surrendering our fear in exchange for a deeper experience of the divine. And that's what we're talking about here. So, so what are the consequences? What is the price of giving away our humanness? We're being told the marketing. Oh man, I know this is happening, and the marketing is. I'm still in awe at how slick and sexy the marketing is, because the marketing says, oh, all you need is a computer chip in your body and your life will be easier. Your life will be freer. You'll be more secure because you'll never be lost. We will be able to pinpoint exactly where you are at any moment of the day. So you're more secure. What we're not being told is the heavy price that we pay for our that kind of freedom and that kind of security. is the compromise of our own divinity, our very humanness. And I think it's a message it's worth sharing, Sue, because I believe our species is worth preserving. I think we are an imperfect species with the capacity for perfection. And I was at a conference recently and I was on a panel, and there was another scientist, and I know you've heard this as well. He says, "Well, Greg, isn't the next step in our evolution to merge our biology with technology?" And man, I had a reaction to that. I said, "No, no, no." I said it is a form of evolution for sure. It's a forced evolution. It's not natural because it requires us to compromise so much of our own natural biology. It cannot be the next step in our natural evolution. It's a forced evolution. And, he hadn't really thought about it that way. So I know these are, for some people, it's a very different way to think. I just want people to be aware that we now have people in positions of power creating the laws and the policies that are moving us in these directions, and to give people a reason to value their humanness before they give it away to something outside of their
Mm.
bodies.
And appreciating their own divinity. I
Yeah.
just taught a class just this past weekend to many students who have been in depth of this inquiry that we're discussing here today, and of course, divinity was a very big part of the topic, and allowing one to accept their own divinity is a feat for us to accept it and embrace it. As
Yeah.
you were saying, we've been being indoctrinated for a long, long time in many facets of life, and cued up to think in certain ways and to not think in certain ways. And we have certain parameters that we can't really step beyond and be within the moral code or even what religion has taught us about what is divine and what is God and who are
Yeah.
we and how does it all fit together. And it's a real challenge for people to embrace that they could be a divine being, that they could be made of something that is that capable of transcendence and that capable of being fully illuminated to this capacity that we are in this role of being generative of life itself. And so, how would you speak to someone about, well, how do I even wrap my mind around being? I understand that we have new contemporary definitions of divinity that allow the rational mind to kind of step up a little closer to it. Are there any additional applications that you could offer up to help someone begin to really accept their wholeness in a way that they haven't before, to the degree that they can have the wherewithal to
Yeah.
make these decisions when given the opportunity to choose to participate in some technological override into their own decision-making process or their physiological responses, their ability to function any given day in the ways that we are designed ultimately to function. What do you have to
Well,
offer
I'm
up
I'm
for
smiling
people?
because I was just going to ask you that question. I was going to say the group that you were with, what was the biggest
Yeah.
obstacle for them? And I think you answered it by saying just their ability to accept that they are that, because the
Mhm.
programming is so deep, Sue, and it runs so deep. In the new book, Pure Human, I talk about that programming uh, in the chapter 7 of the new book. And what psychologists have found is, in a very real sense, the programming to deny our divinity is akin to the programming that people will find in a cult, like some of the cults that were cult, the cults that were rising back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so the movement away from the programming, it's actually a deprogramming, very similar to what you will find in cult like deprogramming. And there are
Mhm.
very clear parameters in terms of how we go about doing that. Um, what I have found most effective first is what we're doing right now. Number one, bring an awareness. What does the science say to us? How is that science supported by 5,000 years of human experience and human wisdom on the shoulders of our ancestors. Our ancestors weren't necessarily scientists, but they sure knew, they understood our relationship to the world and their own bodies. And
Mm,
before we had the complex medical system that we have today, they had really good ways of addressing everything that would come down the road for them. So first, just the awareness. And for many people, when I share the experiments in the laboratory that are demonstrating, for example, that there's a part of us that's not inside of our bodies. There's information that we interpret and the scientific experiments now are demonstrating that. Uh, when we begin to show the capacities of the human body from an IT perspective, and then you begin looking at what this programming really is all about, and how to recognize the programming, and then what the remedy for that programming is really all about. One example of that, we are, as a society, there's a technique that has been used on all of us where our leaders will come to us and they will present a problem, and they'll tell us that it's so urgent, we have no time to think about it, no time to discuss it. And the words that have famously been used is the science is settled. When you hear the words, the science is settled, that's a red flag. Because as a scientist, what I
mm,
can tell you is that science is never settled. Science is a living body
mhm,
of information. It's designed to be discussed and upgraded as new discoveries come to light. We have been told
mm,
on a number of occasions, whether it's climate change or whether it's a global pandemic, that we've been put in a place of fear that takes away our divinity, and the choices are made out of fear. And when people begin to recognize those parameters and those patterns, then they can see how easily it is to fall in to those. And because they have awakened the potential that they're not what they've been told, they're more than they've been led to believe, then they have an awakening. If it's not this, then this. It does no good to talk
mm,
about the problems if there's no way to resolve the problems. But when you identify
mm,
patterns of behavior that we've all followed in the past and say that was one path, here's the consequences. Now, here's another path, and next time you can choose differently. It empowers them to make that
mhm,
choice, but to know that they actually have that choice. It literally is a form of deprogramming, because we have been
mhm.
conditioned to deny our divinity. And so a part of this, how deep you want to go, Sue? How deep can we go with this? Can we go deep?
Deep as you wanna go, man. Deep as you wanna
Well,
go.
well, because
Absolutely.
because what we're doing is we're on the periphery, and we're kind of beating around the bush of a really deep and deeply spiritual concept. We live in this world of polarity where we have light and dark, and we do literally have forces of good and evil. It's not a metaphor. Evil is very real in our lives. And when we look into our most across the board, whether you're talking about Babylonian or Akkadian or Mesopotamian, any of the Mesopotamian traditions, ancient, or we're talking about Native American traditions, or Tibetan traditions, whatever it is, they all acknowledge this fundamental struggle between good and evil, and the role that we were born into the struggle. We didn't start it. We were born into it. And it's kind of nebulous until we bring in this whole conversation, divinity. The goal of the struggle, the goal of evil is to deny our divinity. The goal of the evil is to deny our ability to transcend our limitations, to keep us locked into the fear that separates us from our loved ones and from our friends and families and even from our own power. The goal of the evil is to deny our divinity. And once you recognize that, what you begin to see is that this struggle has defined our entire world throughout all of our history. It's all about this fundamental struggle over our sovereignty and our freedom, to love, to forgive, to heal, to imagine, to create, to innovate, all of these things. So once you begin to see the context, it doesn't mean to get lost in the weeds. I'm not saying that. As a scientist, I'm a systems thinker. So what a systems thinker does is we go to the 100,000-foot view where airplanes don't even fly to get the big picture. And then once you have that big picture, you can let it go and move to the nanosecond of right now to see where my life and your life fit into that big picture. So there is a fundamental
Mm,
struggle, and I think it's obvious to deny human freedom and to deny human divinity. The ability to heal our own bodies is an expression of divinity. And once we
mm,
begin to recognize that, then what we see is that there's something much bigger playing out here. But the beauty of this
mm,
struggle, if you say there's a struggle between good and evil, how do you win that struggle? And this is where it gets really interesting because we don't want to win. The idea of winning implies force against force conflict where one overrides the other. That's the old way of thinking that keeps us locked into the fear, that keeps us separate from the things that we love and cherish so much in the world. We don't want to win, we want to triumph. And the way that we triumph, if the goal is to deny our divinity, then we triumph by living our divinity. We triumph by living the best version of ourselves. And the beauty is you don't even have to know that. When we live and love fearlessly, we forgive without the expectation that something's coming back to us, and we empathy for our brothers and sisters. When we do that, we heal from our ability to heal because we love ourselves enough to heal. By virtue of doing that, we triumph in this ancient struggle, and we don't even have to know about that struggle. That's the beauty. So when we become the best
mm,
version of ourselves, it's not only good for us, but we are aiding our species in this ancient struggle that has been going on since before we arrived on this planet, and and that puts a bigger picture on everything. The
mm,
the ability to discern when something is evil, I think, is one of the most powerful things we can do because we're all being indoctrinated, coerced, whatever words you want to use, to accept new policies in our lives, in our world, and now into our bodies. How do you make that
mm,
decision? Does it affirm or deny our divinity? That's the key. Does it affirm or deny our ability to heal, to love, to forgive, imagine, create? And I think that's the important benchmark for all of us at this time in our lives. So long answer to a
mm.
short question, but thank you for the opportunity to
Yeah.
flesh that out.
Yes, absolutely. So in this polarized reality, we find ourselves seeking unity consciousness in a dualistic world.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that we have to find a way to unify even in the duplicity or the duality that we are faced with every day. One of the things that I am sharing with people is that with compassion, with love, with understanding, we can shower that abundance of light that we truly are onto these frequencies that we would consider unintegrated and dispersed and therefore dangerous or evil
Sure.
as we name it, and have an opportunity to really pull it into an integration if we just refuse to be in the battle that it is inventing, and to see from this place of unity consciousness and how it all can play a role if we become masterful at working with it. Otherwise,
Yeah.
it starts to feel like there's a conspiracy thing that is so big that it's going to override me, and I don't know how to begin to defend myself, and I get more afraid because there's something out there that's big and bad and ugly, and
Yeah.
all the while we're saying, divinity is really the comprehensiveness of all of it, of all of the whole of reality, and so we are that. And if we will awaken, which is what this whole podcast is about, it's the art of awakening. It's not about learning how to run from the evil, how to keep it away from you, because that just continues the dualistic reality. It's about transforming it. It's about transmuting it somehow. And we have to find ways to do so without compromising ourselves and contributing more to the whole.
Well, this is the beauty of everything, and the word evil, it's a tricky word. It has a lot of baggage. It originates in 6,000-year-old texts. So I'm using that because that's the way and these are texts that were
Right.
recently discovered in, the mid 20th century, that were edited out of our most cherished spiritual traditions, not just the Bible, but from
Mm,
other traditions as well. And that's the word that's used. The beauty of what you're saying, Sue, and this is, I love this, is because to to transcend those polarities, somebody has to do it first. And every
mhm,
time one of us makes that choice, what we do is we become a living bridge. We anchor that in the field and we make it easier for the next and the next and the next and the next. The beauty,
mhm,
the deeply spiritual level is this struggle. We triumph because we don't have to fight. That's the whole point. The idea of
mhm,
fight is what keeps us locked into the fear, keeps us locked into the battle. We're writing the new rules because we triumph by living the highest expression of our potential. When we do that, that is called our destiny. When we live the greatest
mhm,
expression of our potential, that is our human destiny. That's why I wrote that into the book. If we refuse to do
mhm,
that, and we are free will beings, there I have met people who choose to deny their divinity. They'll say that's true for everybody but them, and they have the freedom to do that. If they don't choose the highest expression of their divinity to live their destiny, they succumb to the lack of destiny, which is what we call our fate. It's our fate is what happens if we do nothing. Our destiny is what awaits us when we awaken the deep truth of our potential. And
mhm,
I think knowing the big picture, but not getting lost in it. And it's not about making anyone wrong. It's not about being angry that something has been done to us, or those powerful people. It's not about that. That's the context that gives meaning to every day in our lives, because knowing that within that context that we all face, we are tasked, our workshop in life is to live the best version of ourselves in a world that may not always support the best version of ourselves, but we do it because we love ourselves enough to awaken the deep
mhm,
truth of our potential. We do it because we love ourselves enough to live the truth of our destiny. And we are destined as extraordinary beings of extraordinary potential. And I
mhm,
personally believe we're worth preserving uh, at a moment where we're on the precipice of giving our humanness away to the technology. And a lot of people don't know, they think it's like a little dial that you can fine tune. They say, well, we'll become hybrid beings for a year or so, and if it doesn't work, we'll go back to what we used to be. The human body, the way the human body works, is when we are implanted with a chemical or or a chip of some kind, our bodies will morph and adapt to that new condition, meaning that what we used to be no longer exists. And that happens, it can happen in a short period of time, it can happen in a long period of time. The point is, if we embrace that technology in our bodies, there's nothing to go back to because we don't exist in that form anymore. So let's find out, what does it mean to be fully human, and then make a choice. Do we really want to give that away, rather than giving our humanness away and then being sorry in a future generation, or if you're to believe the stories, in a future time, time travelers, there are stories of time travelers that are coming. They're humans, they're us, a century, 2 centuries from now, coming back and saying, please don't make the decision that you're about to make to merge your body with technology, because we did it. We're sorry. We lost our humanness. We could no longer reproduce from inside the body. We no longer have empathy for one another. We want that back. So by us embracing our humanness, we may actually, if you believe in timelines and time travelers, we may actually be helping our future selves by making these choices right now. All we're doing is love. It's just loving ourselves enough to accept the truth of
mhm.
our humanness and our divinity.
Definitely. I am currently writing a book about the exact same topics in terms of how to animate our divinity through our humanity, and really understanding how the energy field works, and
Mm.
in the greater expression of it, from a cosmic level all the way down to the tiny cell that we're, living and breathing from. So you're definitely, singing our song here in this whole community around the world.
I'm
Um,
excited for your new book,
what
Sue. When's that book going to be released? Do you know?
It'll probably be about a year from now, actually, that it actually
Okay.
comes out on the shelf. But you know how much it takes for the whole process to happen. But we're moving along on it every day, working with it, and I'll be definitely sharing excerpts from it before the actual publication date and so forth. So we'll have plenty of time to play around with all of it. So, um, in terms of love, you're talking about love. What is, from a scientific perspective, how does a scientist look at love? How does it come into the mix?
It's a really interesting question. When 1995, the Institute of Heart Math, and I think your viewers, your listeners are very familiar with the
Yes, yes,
pioneering
yes.
research institution that formed Heart Math. I became affiliated with them in 95, the first year of their inception on the West Coast of the US when they moved there. And they introduced the coherence, heart brain coherence techniques that many people are using in their work today. And one of the steps to create that coherence is uh, to feel a positive emotion in the human body. And one of the things the researchers found, they found almost universally, if you can say appreciation, almost everyone can have appreciation for something. Gratitude for anything or anyone, almost everyone can have that gratitude. Compassion. When they asked people to feel love, it didn't work so well. And what they found was that love means different things to different people. And for many, the idea of love has not always been a happy, joyous experience. So the word love carries so much baggage that often it is a deterrent to the emotional, the physiological state that we choose to be in. However, if you look, gratitude is an expression of love. And appreciation is the expression of love, and compassion is an expression of love. So it's the expressions of love that benefit us. The word itself covers a lot of ground, and it means different things. Each expression has its own frequency. There is a unique frequency. Appreciation and gratitude are different for many people than compassion. Compassion is actually a very complex human experience. The Buddhists spend their entire lifetime exploring the science of compassion and what that means in the Tibetan monasteries. So
Mm.
it means different things, different people. From my perspective, when I'm using the word, I am referring to our ability to live the truth of our divinity and our potential to the highest expression possible for us in any given moment, knowing that as we grow and evolve and mature, those expressions grow and evolve and mature as well. So it's the ability to be the best version of ourselves, because I believe we are ultimately an expression of an act of love from for our species that in theory
Mhm.
is reenacted when we are conceived. I know that's not always the case, but it's when you begin looking at the way conception works. Those cells come together. There's a sperm and an egg, but where does a soul come into that? The soul is looking for a frequency to match. So it's the frequency, and they're like harmonics. Our mother may have a certain frequency, and our father, it's not that we're matching either one of those. When they merge, there is an overtone, a new harmonic that's created that's in neither one, and that is what my understanding is. That's what our soul is drawn to, and it's with the first heartbeat that we come in to the biological expression of what that frequency is all about. And I think ultimately that's all about love, all about love.
Mm. It's an amazing thing to explore. Even when someone just becomes curious about love, they begin to
Yeah.
develop their transmuting self, their ability to transform anything. It's the greatest, it's the universal solvent. If you love into anything, it changes it. If you allow yourself to utilize this power that we are made of and therefore we possess, but if we focus it on anything, it changes whatever it is. When we love into something, if you think about it practically, if you love into a relationship that there's dissonant energy in, the more love you bring into that dialogue or interaction, it has to change it. It can't remain the same if there is more love present. And it's such a beautiful capacity that we can begin to animate in larger and larger proportion and learn to do so unconditionally, meaning it's not transactional, it's not bargaining, it's not something that I'll love you if, but when it becomes unconditional, it truly becomes so expansive and transformational for people when they're trying to shift beliefs and do the things that are better caretaking for themselves, to realize that when we can bring love into our thought processes instead of a discipline, it becomes a devotional thing. And when it's devotional, we're more likely to stay with it because there's love in it. And so exploring all of these things are so important for all of us that are listening here today to
Yeah.
begin to explore into my life experience from sun up to sundown. What am I doing to allow more love to be in the recipe and the interaction of every exchange that I'm in?
Yeah, the beauty of what you're saying, the beauty and the implication that comes from everything you've said, Sue, is it means that we are never defined by our past unless we choose to be. We're not defined by the circumstances of our lives unless we choose to allow those circumstances to become the boundary within which we live our lives. We are born, we're the only form of life with the ability to transcend our circumstances because we have divinity. It's through our divinity, the ability
Mm.
to forgive without the expectation that something's coming back. We all forgive from time to time, but how many times do we forgive? And then we look around and see who saw us forgiving because we want to be acknowledged, for the forgiveness. But
Right.
yeah,
How good
or
of a person
loving,
we are. Right.
yeah, or
Hmm.
loving. We all love to some degree, but loving without fear, fearlessly loving, willing to surrender the security of a belief system for an experience with another entity, another human, or whatever it is that is the object of our love, surrendering that in exchange for something greater than we could ever find, just from our own experience. These are all the expressions of our divinity that free us from our past. And on a very personal level, coming from a very dysfunctional, abusive, alcoholic environment, I had to learn this at an early age because so many people surrounding me telling me what my life could not be because of my circumstances or the things I would never be able to do because of where my family came from and things like that. And I listened to them, but I was blessed, Sue, to be born with a really strong soul compass. And and I'm grateful for that because it told me that I didn't have to believe what other people told me about myself. That was their view. I had a different idea. And I'm a student of learning this. I'm still learning this to this very day. And it comes up in interesting ways. It comes up in business relationships with publishers, with event producers, and it's interesting to see how these patterns play out. But I always come back. We're only defined by our past if we choose to allow our past to define us. And divinity is what makes the difference. Our willingness to accept our divinity, which all comes down to love. Do we love ourselves enough to accept the truth of our divinity and our humanness?
And so our past includes the stories that we've been told, that we absorbed, that we believed.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
includes the perspective that you are broken, that you are flawed. It includes any sort of exposure that you've been to having been abused or having been abandoned or left behind in some way. That all of that being in the past is part of what Greg's describing right now. It's what you're talking about, Greg. That we have the opportunity to start right here and right now and decide to create, to generate. And what I find makes that easiest is if there's enough love in the mix, we can dissolve those attachments to the past stories and to the beliefs that we came to find our stability through. As we were all dispersed and not knowing who we were. We were young and trying to just make it work in the world. And so we're listening innocently to the story that's been shared. And in our generation, the story hasn't been quite as supportive as to acknowledge our wholeness as what we're sitting here talking about today. And so, the encouragement is how do we each, as an individual, drop in and discover our wholeness, discover our own divinity, and discover our ability to transcend these ideas of limitation that are all we know, and to feel a deeper sense of self, which you say that you're grateful for being gifted with a strong soul compass. What do we say to the people who don't feel so much that they were born with that kind of knowing or radar or ability to sort through and be
Yeah.
drawn to that which will support their validation of their wholeness,
That's a
their
good question,
divinity?
Sue. I think what we do is we give them the reasons. We offer them the reasons to think differently, and then we lead them to the experiences, the direct experience of what that love means for themselves. And there are many, many ways to do that because everyone learns differently. There are
Mm-hmm.
physiological techniques. Breath work is a powerful form, meditation, of course, but sometimes this is, and I know you found this as well, sacred journeys into nature. It's not so much about the physical site. Physical sites are interesting. I mean, fascinating. Archaeological sites, pyramids, Machu Picchu, Tibetan monasteries, but it's the journey of leaving the familiar and going into something so ancient that holds the vibration of so many who have come seeking in the past, and and then having a direct experience that tells them that they're not what they've been told, and it shows them that
Mm-hmm.
the potential is there. And for some people, that can
Mm-hmm.
mean a miraculous healing for them when others told them they would never heal. And once they do that for themselves, that ignites a level of confidence that says, I can do this. Or for some people, it's a dark night of the soul. When the bulldozer of life, I call it the bulldozer of life, comes through and it levels everything that you love and you cherish, and then it backs up, and then it goes through one more time to make sure not one thing is left. All your relationships, finances, jobs, marriages, everything is gone, and all you're left with is the bare essence of your soul in life. And when an individual heals from that successfully and triumphs from that successfully, it instills a level of confidence that says, man, if I can get through that, I can get through anything. I've
Yeah.
actually had
Right.
people say to me, I got through that one, universe, bring it on again. And I said, oh man, be careful what you're asking
Be
for.
careful.
Yeah, but I've had people
It brings
because
it for sure.
it does because they felt so good about themselves. They said, I never would have thought
Mm.
that I could have survived what I've just been through, the loss of a job, loss of a marriage, my kids turned against me, no income. I mean, these happen to people that I've known, and that is another way of awakening an inner awareness. I'm not saying we have to do that, and we don't, because we are empowered to awaken to our divinity before we we have those experiences. For some people, that's what it takes. It's just how willing we are to embrace the deep truth of who we are and what our potential is. That's why I think information is important as well as the experience. See, because everyone learns differently. Seeing what does the science tell us? What does our ancient texts tell us? And what is our own experience? Then where do we meet with all of that? So
Hmm. And one of the things that, just backing to what you were referencing as forgiveness and compassion, and really working in those realms where we're allowing ourselves to soften and to lean in and to explore another beginning, and to really begin again in so many ways. One thing that I also wanted to just add in for our listeners today is that if we practice those things regularly, consciously and intentionally, that we don't just wait for something to happen that we need to forgive,
Yeah.
but that we practice the felt sensation of forgiveness every day, even if it's not pointed at anything, if it's not directed at anything, to just generate the vibrational environment internally so that epigenetics can have a little bit of that as a reprieve to all the other things that it's trying to navigate, in a day's time. That we
And
practice the frequencies, the felt sensations of compassion, even if you're not directing it toward anything, but just to recognize, oh my gosh, I can deliver an internal environment regardless of my external circumstances on an ongoing basis. And that breeds the environment in which we feel safe enough to begin to explore ideas like love and our divinity and such ideas that are beyond survival. We have to create the environment where we recognize we're not under threat, even though the invitation is there every moment. It's our opportunity to shape shift that environment from the inside out.
yeah, well, that's the point. That's what we were saying earlier. That's the difference between triumphing and winning. In
Mm.
triumph, you move
Mhm.
toward your greatest potential, and by virtue of doing that, you have triumphed in the circumstance. That's very different than conflict and fighting against the things that you don't like. And it's a
Mhm.
subtle concept, but it's a powerful, and there's a deeply spiritual component in here again. So we're living in a time when there are many competing ideas for what our lives, our world, and our bodies should look like, and what we should be doing. And there's a part of us, sometimes we have to push back. We have uh, to preserve the integrity of our humanness and our divinity. But here's the spiritual component. When we do find ourselves pushing back, do we do so from the love that we have for those behind us, our family and our loved ones, or do we do so from the hate and the fear of the perceived enemy in front of us? Now, people might say, "Well, Greg, you're splitting hairs." On a physical level, maybe because the outcome might be the same, but on a deeply spiritual, we're going through this. Isn't business as usual. We know it's a unique time in the world. It's not going to last forever. We're going to get through this. We're going to get through it together. The question is, what do we become? What kind of people do we become 5 or 10 years from now? Do we allow the events of the world that we don't agree with to drive us to these primal instincts of revenge and hate and fear? Or do we love ourselves and our world enough to choose new ways of living because we love ourselves enough to do that? That's different than hating and fearing what it is that has come to our doorstep. And that's the
Yeah.
spiritual principle. What do we become? What do we allow the world to make us into? And that's really, I think,
Mhm.
what we're you and I should do one of these in in 2030. We'll do another one and we'll see where we are at 2030 and how we've all come through this,
Absolutely.
together.
Well, may we do one of these, before then, and we'll
Oh yeah.
definitely do it again then.
Yeah. I look forward to
Beautiful.
that. I look forward to that.
Yes, me too. So I know our time is running near, and so is there any last thing that you'd like to share before? And I'd also like for you to share how everyone can find your work, your new book, and what we can do to support that as well.
Well, thank you, Sue. And I think we've pretty much covered what I would want to share. And I think I'd just like to leave our viewers with the understanding it truly comes down to love and our love for ourselves. Do we love ourselves enough to accept our humanness, our divinity? And don't try to answer it in a chat box. It's by example, how we live every
Mm.
moment in our lives. When we finish a conversation like this, we go out into the world. How do we treat the people at the checkout line in the grocery store, and the server that brought us our food, and the car that just swerved in front of us and cut us off in traffic? That's where the rubber meets the road. So I think
Mhm.
that's what's really important is embracing uh, that potential? Do we love ourselves enough to embrace our humanness, embrace our divinity? And when we find that people are attempting to convince or persuade us to give our humanness away, we can recognize it and choose from love to preserve what we were given in our bodies and as a species 200,000 years ago. So that's what the new book is all about. It's called Pure Human, The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power, and Destiny. It was published by Hay House, is our publisher, and it's available wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever people like to buy their books. It is. I went into the studio and did the audio myself, so it's my voice that you'll hear in the audio as well. Our website,
Mm.
www.greggbraden.com, and that's Greg with two G's, because my mom gave me two G's because I'm not a Gregory. One G is short for Gregory, two G's is just
Uh,
Greg. So
just
Greg
Greg.
Braden, yeah, greggbraden.com.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so, so much for being here today. And it's always such a joy to connect in deep, rich ways that are deeply meaningful about the topics that matter most in life. And it's something that I get to share with you every time we're together. So thank you for being here and
Well, thank
sharing you with all of our listeners.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you so much, Sue. And I'm going to be first to acknowledge, I know a lot of these are new ideas for some people or different ways of thinking. And I just appreciate everyone being open to the possibilities and living the best version of themselves. Sue, it's always an honor to share any stage, virtual or physical, with you. And thank you for sharing me with your community, my global family, your community. And I very much look forward to our next. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, listeners, there you have it. Gregg Braden, a wonderful conversation today. Do remember to subscribe to the podcast, and so you can stay tuned to all of our upcoming episodes. It's always a great joy to share all of life's wisdoms with you, the art of awakening. Much, much love to you all. Until next time, I'm Dr. Sue Morter. Blessings to you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye for now.